we started a new theme, which is meeting the Tantric Guru, and it follows on from our previous theme, which was Tantra for the modern world. So we've heard a lot about Tantra and different aspects of this particular approach to Buddhism called Tantric Buddhism, and how we could apply that to our situation in our current world, our current age, our current culture. And in the same way, we'll be looking at there's one particular aspect of Tantric Buddhism, which was the Tantric Guru. And we heard last week how, in Tantric Buddhism, there's a real emphasis placed on the Guru figure. And the Guru figure will basically tell you what to do. They'll be not just the guide, but you surrender everything to them. And they tell you what to do. So you just kind of completely surrender to the Guru. And they tell you what to do. They give you the particular teachings. And we also heard last week how that doesn't really go very well in our culture. That has been tried in our culture, and it doesn't tend to work out very well. Often what can happen is people get exploited. People give them the power over to a particular person. That person can't quite handle it, and maybe exploitation happens. Or maybe people actually, rather than handing responsibility over to somebody else, they need to take responsibility themselves in our particular culture. So a guru, a Tantric Guru, might not be what we need in our particular situation. But we do need a guide, we do need help, we do need a guide, we do need teachings. We also heard last week from Bodhinaga how the maps, the information the maps we've got, which tell us how to live, they don't quite work, they don't quite get us to the right place. So Bodhinaga was saying, well, we might start off wanting to go to reach bliss, and we end up reaching Barnsley or something. No offence to anybody from Barnsley. We might want to go to Nirvana and we end up in Meadowhall. So we've got the maps, the information we get from society, the maps that tell us how to live, how to make choices. They don't quite work, so we do need a guide, we do need help. So how can we get some of this aspect of the Tantric Guru? And often, the archetypal Tantric Guru, some of you might be familiar with the figure of Padmasambhava, who is called the Vajra Guru. And often the advice from the Tantric Guru could be quite shocking, and is designed to shake us out of our delusion, to wake us up, to move us along. And it could be quite dramatic, quite shocking. So how can we get some of that? And what we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks is how we can get some of that, and where we can get those kind of teachings. But in particular, reality can teach us. We can get those kind of teachings from reality if we are receptive to it. And we'll be looking in different ways over the weeks to come how we can receive those kind of teachings if we are receptive to them. But in particular, at the moment, last week and this week as well, we're looking at an example from the life of the Buddha, and a message that the Buddha, who was an expression, the Buddha was a direct expression of reality, a message that the Buddha gave to particular people, and what that message can teach us, what reality could be saying to us from that story. So we heard a story last week about a young man called Sigala, and the message that reality we could take from reality from that story. And there's going to be a different message, a different story this evening. And the title of the talk is Stop Being Stupid. Stop being stupid. Harsh words from reality. So we're going to hear maybe a harsh lesson from reality this evening. So again, it's connected to the story, and the story is at the time of the Buddha. It's about eight years after the Buddha's enlightenment, and in the kind of area that some of our Sangha are going to go into in a couple of weeks on pilgrimage to the same places where the Buddha was living. And this particular place was called Kosambiya. The Buddha was staying in a place called Kosambiya, and there were at least two different groups of his followers, early Sanghas 8 years after the Buddha's enlightenment. There's at least two groups of his followers in Kosambiya. And the Buddha was just resting there. I think he would go around and he'd just visit some of his Sanghas and make sure basically they were doing okay, how they were checking up on them. And it turns out one of the Sanghas wasn't doing particularly well. A dispute had happened, a disagreement had arisen among the Sangha, among the followers of the Buddha. And it all started over basically a Sangha taking sides. There was two masters within this Sangha. There was a master of meditation and a master of the Vinaya, the ethical rules, the ethical code. And what happened, it transpires, is that the master of meditation had breached the ethical code, the very strict ethical code, and it turned out he'd left a bucket of water on the wrong side of the toilet, and this was considered to be quite a serious breach of the rules. But as it happened, the two masters, I think it was pointed out by the master of the Vinaya, and there wasn't that much of a disagreement. They were both pretty relaxed about it. But when word got out to the followers of these two masters, it became quite a big deal. And the followers began to disagree with each other and accuse each other's master of being in the wrong. The people who were the followers of the meditation teacher were saying, well, your ethics are a load of rubbish, that your master is just taking, these rules are just a load of nonsense. And then the people who followed the ethical master were accusing the meditation master of not knowing the rules and not taking them seriously. And it got worse and worse and worse, and the two sides had really fallen out with each other. And it was described in the sutta as the monks were quarrelling and brawling. They were deep in dispute. They were stabbing each other with verbal daggers. And they'd reached the place where they couldn't convince each other, and they couldn't be convinced. And they couldn't persuade each other, and they couldn't be persuaded. So they were each deeply entrenched, kind of both sides deeply entrenched with their position and not wanting to budge. And this expression, stabbing each other with verbal daggers, it's very evocative, the idea, well, we can cause real pain, real hurt with words. And I was always told by my mum, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words won't hurt you. But here the sutta is describing the words as being verbal daggers. So it is true, actually. Yeah, words really can be very painful. Words can be designed to inflict pain on each other. So it doesn't sound like the Sangha is in a very healthy state. The Sangha is really not in a good state, this particular Sangha. And word gets out to the Buddha who's staying in Kosambiya. Word reaches the Buddha. So the Buddha goes to visit the Sangha, goes to visit the monks to find out what's happening. And he asks them, is this true? Is this true that you're quarrelling and brawling, that you're deep in dispute, that you're stabbing each other with verbal daggers? And the monks reply, yes, Lord, that's true. And so the Buddha asks them another question. Well, when you're doing this, when you're quarrelling and brawling and stabbing each other with verbal daggers, do you maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards each other and verbal acts of loving kindness to each other and mental acts of loving kindness towards each other? And the monks say, no, we don't know. And then the Buddha appears to get cross. In the sutta, the Buddha appears to get cross. He says, you stupid men, or in some translations, misguided men, or you fools. What can you know? What can you see that you are stabbing each other with verbal daggers, that you are quarrelling and brawling? What can you know? What can you see? You misguided men. This will lead to your suffering for a long time. This will lead to your harm for a long time. So, the Buddha appears to be speaking quite harshly to the monks, and what's going on? Isn't the Buddha a gently spoken man? Isn't he kind? Isn't he gentle? Why is he using these kind of words? And the message, there's a clear message coming through from reality. There's a message from the Buddha to his Sangha that your ill will isn't justified. Your ill will towards each other isn't justified. It's going to cause you suffering. Your anger towards each other is causing harm to you. It's causing harm. It's going to cause real harm. And your conflicts are stupid. These conflicts you're having are foolish. They seem really important, but through the eyes of a wiser person or through the eyes of hindsight, they're stupid, they're foolish, they're trivial. So it seems like a really harsh message, isn't that a bit of a harsh thing for the Buddha to say? What we've seen with the Tantra and a Tantric Guru is that reality sometimes will smash through, it just needs to cut through a whole load of nonsense. And Padmavajra and Padmasambhava, I meant to say, but Padmavajra also. Padmasambhava is this kind of character. Padmasambhava wields the Vajra. And the Vajra is the implement that will cut through delusion, the wisdom that will cut through delusion. And Padmasambhava is said to have a fierce smile. His expression on his face, his eyes are kind of burrowed together in a kind of a real fierce stare, fierce glare. But his face is kind of kind and smiling as well. So it's a real paradox that the Kosambiya is fierce and harsh but kind. So it gets across this aspect of reality and the truth, where sometimes, we do need strong words. We do need a very strong message to cut through nonsense, basically, to cut through trivialities, to cut through delusion. Sometimes a vajra is needed. Sometimes harsh words are needed. So there's this kind of fierce aspect of the Vajra Guru, the Tantric Guru, that will cut through. So, and we don't know how the Buddha said these words. We kind of get them in print, and we can imagine the Buddha's kind of maybe losing his temper, but I don't think the Buddha would lose his temper, but I think his intention, well, no he wouldn't, but his intention is to really shake these monks out of what is a really trivial dispute, which is causing a lot of damage. So is it true what the reality is saying, what the Buddha is saying, that conflicts are stupid, that all our conflicts are stupid? Is that true? Are they not, sometimes really important? Is it not, is it not really important that we're right? So is it true that conflicts are stupid? Well, I'm going to give an example which kind of from my perspective, which illustrates for me that often my conflicts are stupid, even though they seem to be really, really important at the time. So this is an example which seemed really important at the time, and that I was losing sleep over, and now it just seems really foolish to me. Actually, it just seems really, really trivial. And it's an example of me experiencing a conflict, a disagreement with people in the Sangha. And it seemed very, very important at the time. But the background is that a couple of years ago there was a renovation to the tea room, and I was involved with somebody else in designing the renovation to the tea room. And to me that was really, really important. And also I wanted to impress Bodhinaga and Soyamata as well. I wanted to kind of, as part of my kind of ego invested in that, I wanted them to think, this is a very good redesign of the tea room. And but what happened was Bodhinaga had noticed that there was a queue was building up inside the tea room, and the design of the tea room wasn't working that well. And this was troubling me because it's not what I wanted. I wanted it to be working well and to get praise from it, and for it to be, to feel really good about it. So I noticed that there was a table by the tier that was causing a bit of a backlog, a bit of a kind of bottleneck in the queue. So I thought, well, if we move the table out of the way, the queue will flow much better, and then then Bodhinaga will be pleased about it, and I can feel really good about myself. So I kept moving the table out of the way of the tier, and then I kept noticing every few days that the table had gone back again by the tier, and this was, who's doing it? What's happened? So I'd move it back again to the other side of the room, and then I'd noticed that a few days later the table had moved back next to the tea urn again, and I was starting to get really cross and asking people about it. Well, are you moving the table? It needs to be at the other side of the room so we don't have a queue. The table needs not to be there, and people would say, no, it's not me. And I kind of had my ideas. I'm thinking, that's probably that person. This person. And in my head, I was creating stories about particular Sangha members. They're moving the table. Obviously, then they're moving the table. It's causing me lots of trouble. And then I want the table. I want the queue to go well so that Bodhinaga will be pleased about it. And then there was a particular tea break at Sangha Night, and I was in the pantry emptying the dishwasher. And I overheard Bodhinaga saying that he'd been moving the table. And, he kept moving the table, and I lost my temper and started to throw verbal daggers. I threw some verbal daggers in the tea room, and I felt justified. At the time, I felt really kind of rightfully indignant that kind of this table was really important and it shouldn't be moved and all the rest of it. And at the time, it just seemed like a massive issue. It seemed like a hugely important issue, and I was really angry about it. And then now to look back 18 months or 2 years or however long it is later, it just seems ridiculous. It just seems so trivial and so foolish, such a foolish thing to have got worked up about and to have got into disharmony about. And so I apologise wholeheartedly to Vidanya for my silliness, my foolishness. And and what I needed at the time was the Buddha or reality to say, "Oh, you stupid man! What you're doing. This is causing you suffering." And I can see, with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that. But at the time, it seemed really real. It seemed really important. It seemed like a really big issue. So I can see how the Buddha might be sounding harsh, but actually it's true. Our conflicts are largely just kind of fabrications. They're just kind of trivial, but they feel really, really important. They feel really, really important to us. So something to bear in mind before I move on to look at the rest of the story and talk about harmony is just that we very often need to, if we get into conflicts, just apologise. What we need to do is actually apologise for our side of it, and just realise that all the time we're going to be getting into disagreements with people. This is going to happen all the time in our life and in the Sangha as well. And instead of focusing on what other people are doing, we need to be ready to forgive very easily and just focus on ourselves and apologise for what we are doing. And that's where the emphasis needs to be. But returning to the story, the Buddha has delivered this harsh message to the monks. He's told them they're being misguided, they're being foolish, and he then gives them a teaching. He gives them a list of 6 principles which will lead to harmony, 6 principles that will lead to harmony and concord in the Sangha. Just bear with me while I find the list. So 6 principles for harmony in the Sangha. They were to actions of kindness with our mind, our speech and our body, both openly and in private. So mental, verbal and bodily actions of kindness, both openly and in private. And then shared possessions, the sharings are things, sharing possessions, sharing ethics, shared values, and shared vision, shared vision. So these are the 6 principles that the Buddha gave the monks. And basically the story ends with the monks completely ignoring the Buddha. Unfortunately, they're just not interested. The Buddha gives them this teaching, and they say to the Buddha, "Well, don't bother, don't trouble yourself with this, and we'll sort this out." And they just completely ignore the Buddha's teaching. And what it takes is the local lay Sangha, the local villagers who were feeding the monks. They threatened to stop feeding the monks unless they sorted out the dispute, and that worked. So it does show where those monks, kind of what their concerns, the concerns really lay, was with their tummies and themselves. It wasn't very grand. So the conflict got resolved eventually, and not unfortunately they weren't prepared to listen to the Buddha, their teacher. So it does show that, and does illustrate, well, in a sense, reality is in front of us all the time. Reality is in front of our eyes all the time. Reality can be teaching us all the time, but we don't want to listen to the message. We're not necessarily interested in the message of reality. So receptivity is important, and and also just another important point. Well, conflicts are very painful, and conflicts can be very damaging. And because they're very painful, I've always tried to avoid them. I've just always had this policy of trying to avoid conflicts. At all costs, I've tried to live my life to avoid getting into conflicts. But the ways I've gone about doing this are not the same as harmony. They're not necessarily harmony. Avoiding conflict isn't the same as creating harmony with other people or living in harmony. So I would try to avoid conflict by just going on with what other people thought, agreeing with others, even if really I didn't agree with them. I'd just kind of either pretend that I agreed with them or avoid the truth, really, just avoid the fact that I disagreed with them. And that was, in a sense, pretending to be in harmony, but actually it's just avoiding the situation. So yeah, that will lead to suffering as well. If you're avoiding conflict, that will lead to suffering as well, because you're not really in communion, you're not really in harmony with other people, and you're just going to end up unhappy and resentful. And yeah, so avoiding conflict also isn't the same as creating harmony. And it's worth making the point, it's important to make the point that it's possible to be strongly in disagreement with other people and still maintain harmony with them. You know, to have completely different views, completely different opinions with other people, and still have a situation of harmony. And yeah, that's quite magical actually, that's quite magical when that happens. So what is it? What is harmony? If it's not avoiding conflict, what is harmony? What does it mean? What is harmony? And there's a metaphor that was used on the Sangha retreat this weekend by Dave, and I'm going to borrow that metaphor, which is the metaphor of an orchestra. If you imagine an orchestra, and in the orchestra there's a whole lot of different instruments and different sections of the orchestra, and they've all got a clear tone and a clear sound, and they're very different from the other sounds of the orchestra. So in a sense that's a metaphor for individuals who know their own mind. They've got their own opinions, and not necessarily the same as other people's opinions. You've got a collection of individuals. But it's possible that those individuals can join together to make something bigger, something greater than the sum of the parts. And with an orchestra, the individual instruments can do that. They each play their individual sounds, but the noise they create, the music they create, can be very, very deeply harmonious and very beautiful. And that's a really lovely metaphor for Sangha. And you know, I've got a musical background, so for me it's really striking. I know what it means when there's disharmony, when two notes don't go together. It's really jarring. And also it's very, very, very beautiful when there is harmony, when the notes and the instruments are resonating with each other. It's very, very beautiful. So for me that's a metaphor that gets us to begin to kind of explore, what does harmony mean? What is harmony? Where we can be resonating with other people, but also an individual also have our own opinions. So I'm going to start in this list. Hopefully everyone can see this list, or I'll go through them and say what they are anyway, so you don't need to be able to see them necessarily. I'm going to start with what the Buddha says in his teaching is the most important. The Buddha says the pinnacle of these 6 principles, I'm standing in the camera stuff, so you if I stand here. The pinnacle of these 6 is a shared vision. The Buddha said that it's like a building and the roof, and the very pinnacle of the roof is what holds the whole building together. And that is what shared vision is. Shared vision holds the rest of these principles together. So yeah, I watched a program called Grand Designs last week on the TV, and someone had built a round house, a kind of it was basically a wall that was a bit like an arch. The main structure of the house was an arch. And if you took that kind of central stone out of the top of it, the whole thing just collapsed. So the Buddha was using that image to say, well, if you don't have a shared vision, then harmony will collapse. It's the shared vision that holds it all together. That's the kind of, he said, it's like the pinnacle of the building. And yeah, what this can mean is a couple of things. But the first thing it can mean is that for Sangha, if you want harmony in a Sangha, then we have a shared vision that we're about something bigger than ourselves, just a kind of small self and our likes and our dislikes and the things that, our opinions, the things that we think are right and wrong. We're part of something bigger than that. We have a shared vision which we can buy into and create together, which is bigger than just kind of my likes and my opinions and my dislikes. So we can sometimes let go of being right and let go of what we want, and do what's right for the Sangha, do what's right for a bigger perspective. But also what the Buddha says about shared vision, what he actually says is the noble view, the right view, the noble view. And this kind of illustrates for me what it means. What does it mean to actually be right? Because according to the Buddha, neither of these sides are right, they're both wrong, because both of them are out of accord with the noble vision of reality, the Buddha's noble vision of reality. So, yeah, they're kind of in this Sangha, the Kosambians have got a wrong view. They're both wrong because they see the world as divided into us and them. They see the world as separated out into our group and their group, and they kind of got quite an entrenched, fixed position. So it's us and it's them, and They've also got a kind of a fixed idea about what them are like, the other side of the group are like. And we often, if we're in a dispute, this can happen. We've got this idea of the other person we're in a dispute with, and they are like this. We've got this kind of fixed idea about them. And it's just very far from the truth. They are like this. This is what they are like. And also, in their deluded state, the Kosambians think, well, actually, satisfaction, what will really get us satisfied is to be right in this situation, to defeat my opponent, to kind of get the better over the other side. That's where satisfaction will come from. But that's all the opposite of the Buddha's noble view, the Buddha's view of reality. So in a sense, this is the list of the 3 lakshanas, the 3 marks of conditioned existence. So, yeah, satisfaction doesn't come from getting one over on other people, from defeating other people, or from being right. Satisfaction, happiness comes from living in concord with other people, from acting in ways that help other people. That's where happiness comes from. And people aren't fixed in a particular way that our labels have them fixed. People are changing all the time. People have deep potential. People have the potential to grow and change and develop. And we're not divided into separate groups and to separate, completely separate entities. But Daniel talked about this last week. A truer vision of reality is a vision of reality that sees us interconnected and interdependent on each other. So it's it's not divided into us and them. We're part of something much bigger and much more mysterious, where we each rely on each other, we each depend on each other. It's a much more mysterious vision of reality. And the Buddha gave another harsh teaching which is recorded in the Dhammapada, and it's said to be related to this incident. The Buddha said, "Those who realise that we're all heading for death will quickly compose their quarrels. Those who realise that we're all heading for death will quickly compose their quarrels." And this teaching is also associated with this story. So this is another take on impermanence. So impermanence is, and one aspect of impermanence is we've got the potential to grow and to develop and to awaken. And another aspect of it is that we're not going to be around forever. And in fact, we don't know how long we're going to be around for. So when you really get that perspective, you quickly compose your quarrels. It puts things into perspective. So people do have this experience when they experience bereavement or experience close to death. Suddenly things become into perspective, things become clearer. What's really important becomes clear. People's values really become clear. And in that kind of situation, you sort out your quarrels, you compose your quarrels. So, you could say that the Kosambians had just lost, they completely lost the Buddha's view of reality, the view of impermanence, of dukkha, what brings happiness, and interconnectedness. And actually the spirit behind harmony is this view of interconnectedness, this view. And that's the spirit behind Sangha as well, actually. It's not about me and you and us and them. It's about a collective which is much bigger than that, much more mysterious and much more magical, that we create together. That's what harmony is about, and that's what Sangha is about. And the emotional equivalent, Sangha actually talks about finding emotional equivalents to intellectual understandings. And the emotional equivalent to interconnectedness, to an Atman, is metta, is loving kindness. That's the emotional equivalent. That's the spirit behind harmony, is metta. So metta is the emotional state, the experience, the emotional state that dissolves barriers, that kind of cuts down boundaries and barriers between self and other, ultimately between self and other. And it's very, very closely related to wisdom and interconnectedness, the experience of metta. So from the experience of metta, I've lost my notes. Looking for page 5. There it is, found page 5, good. So we're talking about metta and the importance of metta. So, also I talked about those 2 sanghas in Kosambiya. There's this particular sangha which is very dysfunctional and a bit of a mess. There's another sangha in Kosambiya which is the complete opposite. It's like the archetype of a harmonious sangha, and it's the kind of example for what a Sangha could be like. So there's a lot to learn from the other Sangha in Kosambiya. And it's a Sangha of 3 very close friends who just live and practice together in the forest in Kosambiya. And the Buddha goes to visit them next. It said that the Buddha, after going to see the monks who are quarrelling, he goes to visit these 3 friends who are known as the 3 Aniruddhas. And he goes to see them next. And the way they describe how they live together really evokes the spirit of metta, how metta underpins harmony, the harmony in a Sangha. The Buddha goes to meet them and he sits down. He goes to meet them in the forest. He sits down and they kind of make a seat for him. They wash his feet. Actually, the Buddha washes his own feet. That's an interesting detail. I thought the Buddha washes his own feet. They don't wash his feet. Forget that. And the Buddha says to them, "Are you keeping well? Are you comfortable? Have you got enough food?" And they say, "Yes, we're keeping well. We've got plenty of food. We're very comfortable." And then the Buddha says to them, I hope, and maybe you get a sense of where he's just been and what he's just experienced, but he says, "I hope, Aniruddha, that you are all living in concord, with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, and viewing each other with kindly eyes." Let's read that again. "I hope, Aniruddha, that you are all living in concord, with mutual appreciation, without disputing, blending like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes." So you start to get a flavour of how they're living in the kind of the atmosphere of metta, that kind of perfumes where they live, the atmosphere that gets created there. So they're living in concord with mutual appreciation. Well, the answer is yes, by the way. The answer is yes, we are living in concord, without disputing, blending like milk and water. And that image of blending like milk and water just, for me, evokes interconnectedness. It's not 2 separate substances, 2 separate entities kind of banging together, disagreeing, knocking against each other. It's 2 substances blending into each other like milk and water. So through metta breeds harmony, metta breeds concord, and dissolves those barriers. You start, rather than starting to see what's different and what you're in dispute with other people, you can see what you have in common with other people. You start to see what you've got in common with other people. You start to see we're all heading for death. We've got that in common, impermanence. We start to see, actually, this person is changing, this person has deep potential. We don't see them just in terms of the difficulties we have. We see their deepest potential. We start to see the whole person. So metta changes how we view other people. So the Buddha recommends mental actions of loving kindness. And what we could say he's talking about is the metta bhavana, the practice of the metta bhavana. The metta bhavana is where we cultivate mental actions of loving kindness, thoughts of loving kindness towards other people. That's one of the first things that the Buddha recommends. And the metta bhavana can completely transform conflicts. Practicing the metta bhavana does and can completely transform conflicts. And I spoke on Sunday, I gave a short talk at the Sangha retreat about leaving my business, and I ended up in a dispute with the business partner that I had at the time. And I was leaving my business to commit myself more fully to Dharma practice and this lifestyle. And there was a dispute over, a short dispute over money, and I ended up leaving without money and feeling some resentment and anger about that. And for 2 years, I put my business partner in the metta bhavana, in the 4th stage of the metta bhavana, for 2 years. And I did quite a lot of work because I realised I didn't want this. I didn't want this resentment. I didn't want this anger. I wanted to see him in a different way. And it took a long time. It took 2 years of consistently putting him in the 4th stage of the metta bhavana practice. But after 2 years, I was doing the metta bhavana practice at Sangha Night, and I had the thought occurred, I ought to get in touch. I ought to get in touch with my business partner and arrange to meet up. And I went downstairs and checked my phone, and I'd got a text message from my business partner who wanted to meet up. He sent me a text message saying that he thought we should meet up. So I thought that was quite magical. It's quite a magical experience. But after 2 years, the response to my business partner had completely changed, and for me there wasn't a conflict. There wasn't a conflict anymore. I didn't feel like I was in conflict with him anymore. And magically, when that changed, he got in touch with me, and there isn't a conflict anymore. So Yeah, so we're doing that in private. You could say that's a mental action of loving kindness in private. But also we need to make those mental actions open. And the way I interpret that is, if you've got a kind thought about somebody, tell them. If you think a kind thought about somebody, don't just keep that thought private. Let them know about it. And this starts to kind of move into the area of speech, the importance of speech. Basically telling people kind things, basically speaking kindly, speaking with loving kindness towards our friends and companions in the Sangha. The importance of that. So we've got a practice called rejoicing in merits. We have a deliberate practice where we consciously choose to identify what's best in other people. We choose to identify and relate to what's highest in other people and tell them about it or tell other people about it, to rejoice in other people. And we need to do this consciously, because so often what we're doing is the opposite. We can be unconsciously or consciously just focusing on people's faults, or on other people's faults, or what's wrong with the world, what's wrong with society, who's to blame. So there's a lot of that can go on in society and in the world, and what we're trying to do is create an atmosphere, create a context where people speak kindly to each other, where there's warmth and positivity, and where we choose to notice what we can rejoice in, what's highest, what we can rejoice in other people. So we look for what's best, and we tell them and we tell other people, and that helps to draw it out of people. We can draw what's highest and what's best out of others just by speaking. It's a magical thing. It costs nothing. It's very straightforward. Just by saying to other people what you really appreciate about them and about your friends, just saying that to other people will help to draw it out of them. So Sangha Rakshita talks about kindly speech. He talks about kindly speech as though he likens it to being like the rays of the sun, the warmth of the sun. When we speak kindly towards somebody else or about somebody else, it's like the rays of the sun. And the warmth of those rays create an atmosphere where spiritual friendship is possible and growth is possible. So it's like the warmth of the sun that encourages a flower to open, encourages the petals to open and the leaves to grow and the flower to grow. Kindly speech is like this. Kindly speech has that effect on other beings, on other people. If you rejoice in other people, if you speak kindly towards them, it will encourage them to unfold and to grow. And I experience this with my friend Amoghavangsa. I go to meet with Amoghavangsa, and I have done regularly, as often as possible for the last few years. And what I always experience is I often arrive, in a worse state than I leave. I arrive sometimes not in a great state, and basically after maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour of Amoghavangsa just speaking kindly towards me, I can experience myself a bit like the flower that's petals are opening and leaves are unfolding. I start to relax, I start to open up, I start to feel a bit bigger, I start to feel a bit stronger. And I just leave feeling completely invigorated, completely different to how I arrived. Amoghavangsa will often praise me and rejoice in me and just tell me that I'm doing well, tell me, just reassure me and encourage me. So it may seem like quite a simple thing to do, but those words have a huge effect, really powerful, really strong effect. So verbal acts of kindness in open and private will have, they have a real effect on the Sangha. They really do create harmony. They create, and they help us. They create an environment where people can grow and people can develop. So speech is really important, actually. Yeah. So speech is very, very important in creating harmony or disharmony. So we heard in the story how the monks were throwing verbal daggers at each other. They were speaking in a way that was divisive, creating separation, creating division. And speech really does create an atmosphere around us. Speech can create an atmosphere, it can create an environment. And speech is also very, very important because it's a very direct expression of our thoughts and our mental states. It's like our mental states splurged out into the world, just kind of blurted out into the world. And we have this expression of thinking out loud. So we might think, well, our thoughts don't necessarily make that much of a difference, but speech, when we say what we're thinking, has a direct impact on the people around us. If we're in a negative mental state and we speak negatively, we kind of blurt it out. It'll kind of have a poisoning effect on the atmosphere. And vice versa, if we're in a positive state and we speak positively, it will perfume the atmosphere around us. So speech is really important in that, and it's also very, very difficult, unfortunately, really difficult to control because it's so closely connected to our thoughts. It happens very, very quickly. We think something, we say it just almost at the same time sometimes, and it can be very, very difficult to train ourselves to just be aware of our speech and just to kind of, to control it, to be ethically aware of what we're saying and the effect it can have. But it's hugely important, so it's something we need to work on the Buddhist path. So when we're ordained as order members, we take on 4 speech precepts. In the 5 precepts there's truth, but for order members there's also kindly speech, meaningful speech, and harmonious speech. So we take an extra 3 speech precepts. Speech is really, really important. Yeah, so we've covered the mental and the verbal acts, but also we need to, in the Sangha, we need to cultivate bodily acts of loving kindness. So what does that mean, bodily acts of loving kindness? Well, basically, it means helping people. It means helping people out. It means giving people things. Basically, we need to express our vision of interconnectedness, or we need to cultivate a sense of interconnectedness with other people by helping them out. Actually, when people need help, we help them out. If people need stuff, we'll give them it. We give gifts. So there is a real culture of people giving gifts within this Sangha, and it's quite a common feature of Buddhist Sanghas throughout the world, but particularly in this Sangha. And when I think of this quality, I think of Tantric, actually, the person who will help people out, the person who gives bodily acts of loving kindness. But most days I encounter somebody and Tantric's done something to help them, whether it's jump-starting the car, repairing a light on the car, and giving them a lift somewhere to another side of the city. So, Tantric really embodies and exemplifies acts of loving kindness, bodily acts of loving kindness, and both in open and in private. So there's the open act where we help somebody out and they know about it, we give them something. But what does it mean to do things in private, to do things for other people in private? What might that look like? And there's another passage from the Anuruddhas, the working Sangha, the model Sangha in Kosambiya. And the Buddha speaks to them and just wants to find out a little bit more about how they live with each other. How is it that they live in harmony? What is it that they do? How do they live? And Anuruddha answers, "Venerable Sir, as to that, whichever of us returns first from the village with alms food, prepares the seats, sets out the water for drinking and for washing, puts the refuse bucket in its place. Whichever of us returns last, eats any food left over, if he wishes. Otherwise he throws it away where there's no greenery, or drops it into water where there's no life. He puts away the seats and the water for drinking and for washing. He puts away the refuse bucket after washing it, and he sweeps out the refectory. Whoever notices that the pots of water for drinking, washing, or the latrine are low or empty, takes care of them. If they're too heavy for him, he calls someone else by a signal of the hand, and then they move it by joining hands. But because of this, we do not break out into speech. But every 5 days we sit together all night discussing the Dharma. That's how we abide diligent, ardent, and resolute in harmony." So a few things to draw out there. Basically, I just find it a really beautiful, it might not sound beautiful, but I just find it a really beautiful passage of how 3 people live together and in complete harmony. They just do what needs to be done. Nobody's saying, well, it's not my turn to do the dishes tonight, it's not my turn. I cleaned the toilets last night. Basically, whoever comes home first sorts out the food and the seats. Whoever comes home last sorts out what's left over. Whoever notices that the bowl's empty takes care of it. And nothing needs to be spoken, nothing needs to be said. There's just complete harmony and cooperation. And it's interesting also to notice, well, they don't need to say very much to each other, but every 5 days they spend the whole night, they have an all-night session talking about the Dharma every 5 days. So you get a sense not of people who aren't talking to each other and a bit cold and kind of distant from each other. You get a sense of real deep harmony, deep communion, and just by bodily acts of loving kindness in private. Actually, no one's kind of taking note of who's done the dishes, who cleaned the toilet. People just get on and do it. And it creates real harmony, it creates a sense of harmony. And so how might that work for us? How might that work in the Buddhist Centre, for example? Well, whoever notices that the dishwasher's full, could just empty the dishwasher. Whoever notices that the tea bag box is full, empty the tea bag box. Whoever notices we're running low on milk, get some more milk out of the fridge. And that's kind of a sense of how the tea room works and can work and does work. Whoever notices that the toilets look a bit dirty, give them a clean. Whoever notices that the towel needs washing, put it in the laundry thing. Whoever notices that the towel laundry bag is full, take them home and wash them. A kind of a sense of, and that's how our Sangha largely works. People just notice things need doing and they do them. And a real example of this at the end of a retreat, at the end of a Sangha retreat, just real cooperation. Within about 10 minutes we cleared up a whole shrine room full of mats and cushions and loaded them into a van. Probably less than 10 minutes, about between 5 and 10 minutes we just cooperated, and people just do what needs to be done. People will clean the toilets, people will mop up, people will cook the food, serve each other. So basically that's how we cooperate as a Sangha. And there's a sense that people don't need to know about what we're doing as well. We're not doing things so we get praised for it, so people notice. We're doing it because we care about other people and we care about harmony. So actions of loving kindness in private will be those actions where nobody knows. I clean the dishwasher, for example, nobody knows about it. I've emptied the dishwasher, no one knows about it. Sometimes it might be you buy a gift for somebody and they don't know who's bought the gift. So it's the motivation is for the other person, for their benefits, not for you to get something out of it. So you could experiment with that, just actions to help other people where nobody knows you've done it, people don't know about it. So it's a bodily action in private. And then the other three principles for harmony that the Buddha talks about are connected with sharing in different ways, sharing different things. I've talked about shared vision already, but the Buddha talks about to the monks at Kosambiya about sharing their possessions, just sharing whatever they have. And interestingly, he talks about alms food. He talks about even if it's what's in your bowl, and because that's probably, he knows that's what the monks are motivated by, they're most interested by what's in their bowl. So he says, well, even if it's what's in your bowl, share that with your companions. Share whatever you have with your companions. So again, this does perfume our Sangha, the sense of shared possessions, but it could even more. We could be even kind of more radical with that. We're just sharing possessions, sharing what we have with other people, and probably most easily done if you live in a community with other Buddhists. But there could be more creative ways of sharing possessions and sharing what we have. But this act of sharing again will gradually dissolve barriers, dissolve a sense of separation between you and other people, because it's not my thing that I own. It's just our possession. It's a shared possession. And me and Maitradasa, we experimented a little bit with this on our ordination course. We shared a hut for 4 months on our course, and inspired by the model of the Anuruddhas, Maitradasa suggested, well, we play a bit with shared possessions. So rather than having a kind of a line down the middle of the hut, and this was my half of the hut and that was Maitradasa's half of the hut, it was more like it was a shared hut. And he thought about this beforehand, and he brought along, rather than us having our own separate shrines, he brought along a picture of my wife and his partner together, and we said we'll have a joint picture, we'll have a joint photograph of our kind of loved ones on the shrine, and we'll have a joint shrine. And we pulled all our books together and said, well, rather than having my books over here and his books over there, we'll just have a kind of shared library, and if other people want to borrow them, they can borrow them. We even shared cosmetics. We kind of surprisingly offered each bought a range of cosmetics to last us for the 4 months, and we decided we'd share the cosmetics. And we even shared laundry as well. We didn't have washing machines or hot water. It was washing our underwear in cold water, and whoever noticed that we just chucked our underwear, our washing in the same bag, and whoever noticed it was full would go and wash them in cold water by hand. And that was actually it became quite straightforward. At first it seemed like quite an uncomfortable thing to consider, but actually it started to feel much less and less. I could see the sense of how there wasn't this kind of strict sense of what's mine and what's his and what's him and me. There's more. You can start to see how the boundaries start to dissolve a bit, the kind of sense of separateness starts to dissolve a bit. And it actually became a pleasure. I began to get up. I'm not a morning person, but it began to become a real pleasure to get up half an hour before the meditations and brew a cup of tea for my Tridasa, because there wasn't electric kettles, but it'd be quite an effort to a bit of an effort to get out in the cold and heat up some water in a gas kettle. And it started to become a real pleasure to get up earlier than I needed to make my Tridasa a cup of tea. And it's not something that's carried on since I've got home, unfortunately. And my wife doesn't get a hot cup of tea every morning. But there was, for those 4 months, a sense of, kind of a shared space, or a shared relationship in a sense. And it was really harmonious, and the whole retreat was really harmonious. Really beautiful, really powerful experience. So where have we got to? So maybe one last thing to say about harmony, and that is, again, from the Anuruddhas. There's this principle and a practice which epitomises interconnectedness, and it's a practice which is sometimes called the exchange of self and other. It's the idea that you exchange yourself for another person. You imaginatively identify with the other person, rather than seeing the world through your eyes and seeing yourself at the centre of the universe. You think, well, what would it be like to see the world through this person's eyes, this other person's eyes? To see if I was them, and what would it be like, what would it feel like to be them? How would I feel? What would the world be like? And you can reach a point where you decide what your likes are, what your preferences aren't that important. You can put aside what you want to do and just do what the other person wants to do. And so again, there's a passage from the Anuruddhas where the Buddha asks them, well, how is it that you live like milk and water, that you blend like milk and water, viewing each other with kindly eyes? And how do you live like this? And they reply, Venerable Sir, as to that I think this, it is a gain for me, it is a great gain for me that I am living with such companions in the holy life. I maintain bodily acts of loving kindness towards them, openly and privately. I maintain verbal acts of loving kindness towards them, openly and privately. I maintain mental acts of kindness towards them, openly and privately. And I consider, why should I not set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do? And then I set aside what I wish to do and do what these venerable ones wish to do. We are different in body, Venerable Sir, but one in mind. We are different in body, Venerable Sir, but one in mind. So you get the kind of the culmination of this practice of harmony and metta, where it's possible to reach a state where you experience yourself as being in one in mind with other people. And maybe that's the analogy of the orchestra, where you've got individuals each playing a different tune with different qualities, but an experience of just being one, collectively one with those people. So you could see that as the pinnacle. You could see it's both it's the decision, it's a conscious decision to put aside what you want to do and to do what other people want to do, to put your preferences to one side and to do what other people want to do. And you could see that as a direct expression of interconnectedness and the wisdom of what we call an Atman, no separate self. But there is a warning, maybe a health warning, to say, you need to do that in a particular situation, a particular context where there's shared ethics. If you go into or any kind of random situation, just say, well, I'm going to put aside what I want to do and do what the other people want to do. It's not always going to be a good idea. It's probably quite often not going to be a good idea. But if you're in a situation where there's a shared vision and shared ethics and a shared context, actually the decisions become about something bigger than just you and your likes and your dislikes. The decisions are more important than that. The decisions are bigger than that. So in that kind of context where there's shared ethics and shared values and each people are committed to kindness and generosity and truth, well then there's it's possible to experiment with that kind of exchange of self and other, putting aside what you want to do and doing what other people want to do. I forgot to say one thing earlier, so I'm going to just revisit something important that I forgot to say, which was another short anecdote. And it's just about the importance of truth, actually, the importance of truth in harmony. I talked about avoiding conflict and just, in a sense, not living out of the truth. And in a sense, you can't get harmony. You can't get harmony where there's no truth. So another key principle, a really important principle for harmony is truth, that people are prepared to speak the truth with each other and just be truthful and be open with each other, not to conceal things. And I just wanted to share an experience that I had yesterday of this with my friend Martin, because me and Martin had, it wasn't, I wouldn't quite call it disharmony, but there's a sense of, we both experienced a sense of awkwardness. So even amongst friends, people that you're close to, there sometimes can be an awkwardness or a sense of unease. And we were probably both choosing just to avoid each other and avoid talking about it a little bit. And we kept, wanting to meet, but it never happened. It never happened that we'd meet up to talk about it. But we met up just yesterday we met up. And the theme of our weekend retreat had been fearlessness, and particularly fearlessness in communication. And I was really grateful to Martin, because he was fearless, and he just raised this issue. He said, well, there seems to be a bit of an awkwardness. I feel a bit awkward around you. And we talked about it, and then I thought, I'm really pleased you said that, because I've been feeling a bit awkward as well, and there's some things that I was wanting to tell you about, and I wasn't sure if I could say them or how it would go. And basically, there's what we both realised was just by speaking the truth, and we've both been certainly been avoiding the discomfort, and just by actually just being brave and courageous, and Martin saying, well, this is the truth, this is what's happening. We came out of that meeting just with a completely different friendship, actually, a much, much stronger friendship, a much deeper and closer friendship. So there's just an important quality I want to add on, just tag on around truthfulness. Sometimes, what we need to do is be brave and speak the truth to another person, not avoid conflict. We just need to say what we really think and what really needs to be said. And surprisingly, if we do that kindly and skillfully and well, what will happen is we'll often experience ourselves in closer connection with the other person. Okay, so it's time to summarise, and to just summarise by saying, summarise what we've been talking about. Reality is telling us to stop being stupid. The reality is saying to us, stop being stupid. Let go of your conflicts and get real. We need to let go of our conflicts and get real. If we are all heading for death, if that's the truth, then what use will victories and status be on our deathbed? What we're going to do with victories and status then? So we need to make ourselves part of something bigger. Make yourself part of something much bigger, and actively seek to create harmony with other people. Seek to build something. Seek to build community and create harmony. But at the same time, understand that we're all flawed. Understand that each of us is flawed, and we're going to need to forgive other people and apologise. Apologise for our fault in creating disharmony. Cultivate an attitude of metta. Cultivate an attitude of sharing, both with body, speech and mind. And create an atmosphere where barriers of self and other can gradually become dissolved, where those barriers can gradually become dissolved, and where we realise that my happiness depends on the happiness of other people.